3H project?
Yep.
Yep.
So,
Okay. Okay. Welcome to everyone to lecture number 4. It's being recorded of the 3H project, Healthy and Historic Heritage. I'm very pleased to say that Gareth Boyle, who's the person responsible for the funding, has also joined the call tonight. And I don't know if he's going to sit the whole way through. We'll see. But I just wanted to introduce Gareth. You want to just unmute yourself a second, Gareth? Because just on behalf of all the people on the course, I want to thank you for making this possible at a time of such distress. It's fantastic to do something that's useful and will be useful for the future. So thank you very much, Gareth.
no problem, Frank. Thank you for inviting me along. Hello, everybody. My name's Gareth Boyle, and as Frank has quite rightly introduced me, I'm part of the Lottery Heritage Fund. So we've actually supported Frank in delivering this project, and he's invited me along tonight. So I was interested just to see what it's all about and meet everybody. So hello, everybody, and I look forward to hearing what Frank's going to take us through tonight in terms of the history around the square. So I'm just going to keep it short and sweet and let Frank do all the talking, as I say. So thanks a million, and glad we were able to help with this project, and look forward to seeing the fruits of the labour and the hard work that you put into this, and it looks fantastic. We were sharing out that photograph you sent last week of the participants, so that's now it'll be shared out next week on social, just to gain some more noise around this and basically promote it as much as we can, because everybody's trying to recover from the current lockdown restrictions and hopefully have something to work on moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you. Okay, so we'll make a start. We are at lecture number 4. Now, I was hoping to cover what I call the 21 rats, and I'll explain about that later on tonight, but there's so much content in tonight that we're not going to get to it. So we're going to end up at the end of the First World War tonight. So the good news is that the project website is up and running, so you can go there and have a look at it. And what I would like to do, if I'm going to contact you by email, is there'll be a page on there where you'll be on that page. You know, you can add to it, there are things you can add to it. So it's a dynamic thing. It's not just a website that's going to be forgot about. It's going to run over 3 years, and it'll be an ongoing dynamic uploading of what we find, and perhaps sharing your experiences with your fellow tour guides or your customers as you drive past Brown Square, hopefully. I was also hoping that Mike Keane, who's the Heritage Manager of the Down County Museum, would join us tonight. He probably will come in later on. And the reason being is because, as you'll see next week, there's a direct connection. I wanted to put this photograph up because what they've done in Down County Museum is rebuild one of these huts. So this is what's called an Armstrong hut, and it's rebuilt now at Ballykilner. And one of the guys that is on in the talk tonight would have stayed in one of these huts when he joined the UVF and then joined the 36th Ulster Division. So this is what's called an Armstrong hut. And lo and behold, same huts were used to house internees from the IRA. And you'll see another man from Brown Square there, or from the Brown Square area. So Eamon O'Quinn of 55 Old Lodge Road. So he would have been operational in the Brown Square area in the 1920s. So that takes me on to this. So warning, okay, now up to now we've been doing the 1798 rebellion, you know, all the way from the Icy Age up to the 1880s. We're going to cover Home Rule, but we're now into what I call shared memory time, because, for example, I call what became the War of Independence for some, to me it was a 21 rats, because my grandmother lived through it, and that's what she called it, and that's where she took me around. So there's living links and living memories to what from here on in to the end of the project itself, or the last lecture. So how do we cover it? Do we the skirt around it? Try and talk our way out of it? No. So I'll be delivering this as is, and I understand there's a lot of people on here who wouldn't know the phraseology of what's about to happen. For example, IRB, UIG, RHC, PIRA, UVF, SIB, NLA. So for somebody like Luca who's on the call tonight, he would probably pick up UVF and that will be it. And yet it's the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the Ulster Imperial Guards who'll appear tonight, the Red Hand Commandos that you can see on your right hand side there, the many forms of the IRA, from the official, the stickies, the provies, the Ulster Volunteer Force, Security Intelligence Branch of the British Army, and the Irish National Liberation Army. Now, the photograph on the left is Martin Meehan, who was OC commander in the Ardoyne. And the photograph on the right is a guy called Plum Smith, and this guy here is Winky Ray, and he was the commander of the Red Hand Commandos. Incidentally, he's in court at the moment because he did the Boston House tapes. And that's me in the middle. And my former guys, about 10 years ago, whenever I was over in Poland, and they got me an SLR. So I was like a kid at Christmas. So how do I, a British soldier, deal with these guys here? So this is how we're going to do it in the project. So this is Martin Meehan on the left and Winky Ray on the right, and that's me in the middle. Okay, that's my regimental association coat of the Connaught Rangers Association, which I was honoured to become the northern representative of. And Martin was at the military chapel in St Don's Cathedral, and he wanted to commemorate that the project I was currently doing at that time, which was to tell the First World War as it is, because his grandfather served on the Somme, as did this man. And so rather than duck round heritage, we have a shared heritage, and it's something that has not been spoke about. And it's because of the division there are in society. That's not what we're doing in this project. We're going to cover it, warts and all. So this lecture is called Home Rule Mary, and you'll hear about her later on. And just to sum up, at Brown Square, the houses have become the front line in sectarian ratting, and especially those who were in mixed marriages, they were the easy targets. They always lived on the verges. Social activities such as club sports and societies were increasingly segregated, if not completely, on religious grounds. Education became segregated at primary and intermediate levels, with the Roman Catholic Church playing a major role from the 1850s on. And remember, primary segregation started at Brown Square 1824. And so if you look at the census then from 1901, you can see that even in 1901, there was still mixed marriages and people living in Brown Square from all sorts of places. This one is 21 Brown Street. Now, you've already come across Brown Street. It's where Hayes Tavern, where the United Irishmen met in 1794, 1785. And here you have John Donnelly and his wife, two Roman Catholics from County Armagh, both Irish speakers. Now, this is Brown Square. Remember, the heart of loyalism, the heart of the empire, as I was told by a councillor. And down beneath, you have one of those other rare ones, which is again in Brown Street. So you have the Porter family, where it's the male is Church of Ireland and his wife is Roman Catholic. Both are Irish speakers, as is their daughter. And you can see his wife worked as a spinner in the mills. He was a general labourer. And here in Brown Square itself, number 49, so about 15 yards in that direction is where I'm sitting tonight. You have someone who obviously rented out accommodation. Now, remember, we're talking here 2 men to a room. The toilet was outside. There was no hot running water. So really bad conditions. But this is where they had to live. And you can see the person who owned it was Eliza Hall, Roman Catholic. And you can see that the list of people from all over who came here to work. So you know about the 1857 preaching rats that happened here. So 1864 came along. So by then the town police had been abolished. They were found to be wanting when it came to the 1857 preaching rats. And there was inquiry, and it was decided then that the Royal Irish Constabulary would take over. And so there was a barracks built at Brown Square, which was there whenever I was a boy. So that's a picture on the right. And if you look at the returns of the census of Ireland from 1901, it shows the makeup and how the police forces tried to become fair and equitable in the eyes of both communities. Now, we now know that that's virtually impossible, but you've got to give it a try. So that's what they tried to do. And if you have a look at this breakdown, you'll see that it's 49% of the policemen who were the Royal Irish who were at Brown Square Barracks were Roman Catholic. I think that's 30% Church of Ireland and 21% Presbyterian. And they came from all over Ireland. You can see Fermanagh, Leitrim, Wexford, Kerry, Galway, Sligo. And the reason for that was, and it's also the same to a large extent in the British Army, is that the Irish police believed that if you served in your own town, you could become corrupted. So therefore, if you joined up, you had to move. It's very much the same in the British Army. You weren't allowed to serve. If you were born in Northern Ireland, you weren't allowed to serve here, except for a few notable exceptions, of which I'm one. So you can see the barracks. It was still expanding when I was down here in Brown Square, and then in 1868, Home Rule happened. You know, but already rats had occurred here. Now this, to me, I think this is actually Brown Street School in the background. So, and this is a representation of the Hussars charging up Wilson Street. And you have the London Illustrated News of 1886. And here you have the RIC attacking loyalists who are opposed to the Home Rule. And my guess is that this is Hamel Street or John Street in the background. And I think Jerry can maybe back me up on that one. So the police became police. You know, they tried to keep order. And if they couldn't keep order, if you notice those police are charging with batons, not rifles, then the military was brought in. You'll see these guys are carrying carbines with swords drawn. So how did that work out? Well, there's no record of their performance at Brown Square, apart from no visual record. But we do have a visual record of how they performed during the Home Rule riots on the Shankill Road. And this is Bowers Hill Police Station. It's now where the Greater Shankill Partnership Board are based. Don't know if that was a Freudian slip there or not. But you can see that there was a battle between them and rioters, so loyalists. They were then cornered and trapped in this building, and they opened fire. So they, as my old lecturer said, if you offend both sides equally, then you're getting somewhere in Ireland. And that's what they were doing. Okay, you can just about see the police standing outside here, by the way. It's a nice picture of that. This would be taken, anybody who knows, doesn't know the Shankill Road, if you're doing a tour up there, when you get to Iceland, just as you cross over at the lights, this building is on your right. So it's still there today. So you can point it out to tourists. How did that affect then? So over time, by 1911, the same Brown Square police station had magically transformed. So by then, okay, Church of Ireland made up 46% of the total strength at the barracks. Roman Catholics 30%, 32%, and Presbyterians and Methodists appear for the first time as well. So what had changed was that people had begun to listen to politicians in their analysis of what was happening in the riots. And so slowly but surely and quietly, the police force changed, and the barracks was still here. Let's say when I was a boy, this particular photograph was taken at the back of the barracks, and this is the King's Own Scottish Borders, I think, playing netball in the courtyard. And underneath their feet was a gun range, by the way, which we used to play in when we were kids. So you can see things had swung and changed. How did it work out? You know, how did this change come about? Well, it came about because of the press, you know, Facebook of its day. You know, if you remember, if you look at those people up in those slides at Brown Square, about a third couldn't read nor write. And so they took their politics and analysis when they had the time. Most didn't, but they would have been at the bar, or they would have been at a drinking lounge or in a spirit grocer's, and somebody would have read out the newspapers to them. So, you know, you have three examples of the Northern Whig. You know, speaking in Hackney tonight, Mr. Charles Russell asserted the land question lay at the root of the Irish difficulty, and until it was settled, there would be agitation. So for them, it wasn't about home rule. It was about the land question. And we know that the Hearts of Steel had fought at Brown Square, and that was in 1700s. So land question wasn't really at the root of what was happening. In the middle, you have how people then tried to mix up and use religious history or history and tainted history to put a spin on today. You only have to look at Facebook to see how it goes on. So this one here is from the Belfast Weekly News, February 1886. And remember, people reading these believed this was absolutely true. You know, there was very little question of what they were reading. So take, for instance, the Rome Rule of Mary, the thumbscrew in the dungeon, the fiery flames of martyrdom, the poor Wallenses too, how fervently they thanked their father for the threat of the humble past hero Cromwell, that unless the persecution was stayed, the thunder of the cannon should be heard in Rome. It was well with England in Cromwell's times, no doubt, but in the glorious Elizabethan England, with her Protestantism, was in her blushing pride. Meanwhile, over the water, what was the state of matters under Rome rule? Withered Catherine had her secret chambers, Huguenot massacres were in the fashion. So really what they're doing is saying is, and they learned what Boris Johnson has learned, keep it simple, keep the message simple, keep it, but people can actually rhyme it off. Home rule is Rome rule, home rule is Rome rule. And if you speak to people today in certain areas, they will say exactly the same thing. It's embedded into the psychology. On the right, you'll see an orange man on home rule. And I do remind you, this is the 1880s, now, not the 1680s. So is it true that orange men intend to arm themselves to resist home rule? Should Parliament be passed for Ireland? Now, before we move on here, home rule was extremely limited. It had no powers over taxation. The Parliament in Dublin that was proposed would have no powers over the policing, taxation, foreign affairs. It was very much like our assembly is operating today. So, you know, but it was the symbolism and the psychology here that was from the top down, and through the Orange Order, it could be spread more effectively. How do you know? So it is quite true that the entire body in Ireland are preparing to defend their homes, families and properties against the depredations of those Irish agitators who have been clamouring for the dismemberment of Ireland for some years past, who have brought disgrace and ruin on the inhabitants by their cold-blooded murders and boycotting of persons who would not join their ranks, thus driving the law-abiding and loyal people out of the land so that they more easily wrested from England and have it ruled over by a popish hierarchy. Those who believe to be the main intention of those people who are the enemies of Ireland, as long as it is part of the Crown of England. So you have it all there. You have thumbscrews, Bloody Mary, you know, you have the boom, you have Oliver. I always prefer this painting of Oliver Cromwell, as you can see, warts and all. So it's looking to the past, getting a simple message, because big business didn't want home rule, because really it would have meant that southern politicians would have had more of the say on affairs, whereas they did have the say here. So they decided to oppose it, and they used every means in their power, and they were expert at doing so. So for people on the street, okay, so unionists had the support of businessmen at the highest levels, most of whom were also members of the Orange Order. James Craig's family were connected with Dunville Whisky advertising, and that's where he learned the techniques of mass marketing. So today, stay home, stay safe, protect the NHS. So how do you get that across? So he had learned that if you look at Dunville Whisky here, you have a girl that almost appears to be a flower carrying the whiskey. You can see it's appealing to a male audience. It's striking, as is the man himself. So this is James Craig in his youth, Orange Man, as defined by Punch magazine. He changed over times, and he died in office as Prime Minister of the new Northern Ireland. So that he was the marketing genius behind the Home Rule campaign. How did he do it? So over here you have the pro Home Rule. So Home Rule, an act of union that satisfies both parties. Like, to me, that's really Father Ted, way Ted. Home Rule, isn't it great? Sure. And that's being honest. So no great message there. Here you have the posters that went up in England, okay, and cartoons. So you have an English lord with John Bull, and he can stay in, I have to do this, the sunny uplands of Brexit, okay, or he can go down in the dark ruins of the partition of Ireland. The partition of Ireland away from England with a Home Rule Parliament, and of course the break of the disunited empire, okay. And here you have Ireland as John Redmond reaching for Home Rule, and of course he's standing all the piles of money that the English government has supplied, with John Bull going to treat him as a naughty schoolboy, trying to take the flower. So powerful symbolism. Ulster's question, what flag do you want? I quite like this one because the motto of the Ulster Unionist Party in the 1880s was Erin go Bra, Ireland forever. And here you have Ulster forever in Irish, but please note it is in Irish. So here you have a choice. You have a castle, a united empire, simple, clean message, a flag there. It's all united with the Queen up there on top of the symbol. And over here you have the panic of Home Rule, where you have the Pikes of 98, you have the Americans, you even have pirates involved. And one for Luca here, you have the French, you have American dollars instead of British pounds, boycotting. This guy down here, Joe Devlin, will play a part in our story next week because he was born in Hamel Street, just beside Brown Square. Intimidation. Molly Maguire's down here, and the Ancient Order of Hibernians. So you can see how they cleverly use that symbolism, and that's the ultimate part of it. And these were postcards, by the way. So you would have got these handed to you. You would have posted them abroad. They were free, but then they actually started to sell them because they were so popular. So this Home Rule is a disaster for Ireland. The Albert Clock's going to get pulled down. Very simple messaging. How did it pan out in Brown Square? This is Peter's Hill. That's taken from the London Illustrated News of 1886. And the inevitable riots took place. Now, I've tried to place this to the best of my abilities. And so the same place, and this is October 1969. Now, in our round, I know that because this is where that actually same riot from 1886 took place. And here's another riot taking place, and you can see a British military police trying to get the crowds to go back. The Protestants, the loyalists will be attacking from up here. You can see the British Army has been deployed because you can see a small sandbag Sanger there, and you can see a lookout post up at the top of what was then Unity Walk. So the flashpoint, if you think back to 1857, in fact, way back to 1815, this is the Ratton Point, had evolved into the Ratton Point of 1886 and was to further evolve. And for anybody who's doing their tours, this is the exact place today. So this is Carrickhill. And this actually is a peace lane here. So we're going to cover that as part of what are peace lanes. In this case, as you can see, it's a doctor's surgery, but there's the classic peace lane mentality in that it's double gated. So even today, it's still a segregated part of the town. And so we'll come on to Home Rule Murray, my favourite. So exactly in the same place. So this is 1893 when the second Home Rule Bill was going through. So two young men named Smith and Mullen and a woman named Mary McCulloch, better known in the area as Home Rule Murray, brought up in custody of Sub-Constable McGowan, charged with being drunk and disorderly in Millfield and using party expressions. So Constable McGowan said that Smith and McCulloch were drunk in Millfield, passing the end of Brown Street. There's Brown Street again. They shouted for Home Rule and in consequence got arrested. Today they were fined by the PSNI for a breach of COVID regulations. When arrested, the crowd in Millfield followed them and stoned the police until they got to Divis Street Barracks. I'm taking a guess that's Hastings Street Barracks, but I'll need to check that out. Mullen appeared to be the leader of the crowd, took up several stones, which he put in his pockets and afterwards threw at the police. They couldn't have been very big stones. Obviously hadn't learned the art of ratting. So 1883, even as far back here, St. Patrick's Day, and I wanted to bring this in because yesterday was St. Patrick's Day for all those of us who are still recovering. And so first to march into the throng was Grattan, the Grattan Band, which marched up Donegal Street to the strains of the Marseillaise hymn of France, went round by Carrickhill and took up their position at the head of West Street. Several others followed from the low markets and Ballymacarrick districts. And a few minutes of 9 o'clock, the processions had taken up a position around Smithfield Square, awaiting marching orders. Their banners, some 8 or 10 in number, characteristically displayed several of the prominent national leaders, and almost all exhibited in large letters the well-known words, "God Save Ireland." Some 6 or 7 bands, so that I'll just go down a wee bit to at the lower end of the street, West Street, an unusually large number of constabulary were stationed together with a detachment of mounted men who, upon the processionists endeavouring to force their way past, at once showed a determined resistance. Mr. Hamilton RM and Blake RM, resident magistrates, who were in command, communicated the fact to the leaders that they could not by any means infringe upon the laws laid down by authorities prohibiting their advances in that direction, and advised them to leave the square by the means of Barry Street. The advice was unheeded, and the constabulary were to fix bayonets and repel them at the point of steel. Same flashpoint, same time, same place. Brown Square. And this is actually where it took place. So here's West Street. And there we have Wilson Street. That's been in our lectures almost from the start, but now you can see how the area has been developed. The distillery has gone, it's now become flex stores, and it would eventually become a police barracks. And you can see the tiny houses that grew up around Wilson Street. This area here was purchased, as you'll find out, by the Crawford family and leased, and it was purchased from Lord Donegal. So you can see how this mark up here, by the way, that's coming into another lecture on World War II. So you can see how quickly it built up. And you also see some of the bars of the area. So down here, you have the Celtic Bar and Coaches Street. I know it says Coates Street, but it's pronounced Coaches Street. You have the Soho Bar. Over here, you have the Phoenix Bar, which is going to figure next week. So the bars are in, and they do reflect the politics of the area. Like you have the Colonial Bar here at the corner of Brown Square. And as I say, there you have the Celtic Bar. So the colonies and Celtic, opposing. And this area here is going to feature in a moment. So how did Home Rule actually work out? Well, 1886 it went through, and this is important because we were really in the driving cockpit of what was going on in United Kingdom politics, because the first Home Rule was defeated in the House of Commons, and therefore that was it dead, because it has to be also passed in the House of Lords for it to become law and signed off by the Queen, or King as it was then. 1893, the second Home Rule was passed by the House of Commons, but was then defeated in the House of Lords because the House of Lords held more of the supporters of what would be the Empire. And so they seen this as being a direct threat to the British Empire. They were right. 1912, the third and last Home Rule passed under the Parliament Act. Now, this is really because the Prime Minister at the time threatened to make thousands upon thousands of lords and ladies, lords mainly, in order to outnumber the current sitting lords. And so in the end, it was passed, but it had strange bedfellows. So, today you have Winston Churchill being held up as the pillar of supporter of Northern Ireland. But if you look, Winston Churchill came to Belfast and was literally chased out of Belfast. They had to bring in a ship, especially for him, to get him away, because he was pro Home Rule. So the contradiction of Irish history, that same contradiction, that what people believe to be true and heritage actually isn't. So Winston Churchill was for Home Rule, and in fact he became, when First Lord of Admiralty, as you'll see, he threatened that he could flatten Belfast in about 6 hours if called upon. Also, you have this guy here, who I will hopefully show you. You're going to see his grave when we go to the Shankill graveyard, and that's the Reverend Isaac Nelson, and he was a Home Rule MP for County Mayo, and he also then became a minister in the Shankill Road, and he's buried in the Shankill graveyard, I reckon about 30 yards away from Friar Phillips. So everything is not what it appears to be, but for people who could neither read nor write, who were taking their politics from street corners or receive wisdom coming down through things like the Orange Order, it was a simple thing to do, and that was they were going to then rebel. Now, for anybody who's on the course, you know that this is a fact, that the rebels become the loyalists and the loyalists became the rebels. It's Henry Joy McCracken springs to mind, James Hope, and so here you have the honor guard. So you have what's known as Carson's Praetorian Guard, and he is marching, it looks like Town Hall Street, back to City Hall, and these are members of the Ulster Volunteer Force, the UVF. And so a propaganda campaign was then started because this is a direct threat to the Crown Forces, the British Army, who were then being readied to be deployed against the UVF. Okay, so the British Army was going to be deployed against the loyalists. And here you have a propaganda campaign. So you have John Redmond being pointed out, shall British troops be used against Ulster? So British disaster in South Africa cheered by nationalist MPs. Now South Africa is the Boer War. So we're going to get that in a moment. So the propaganda machine of Craig was working even then. So Ulster Volunteer Force, the Army. Now I have a few books again that I use for secondary sources, but this one's, you can all see that, Carson's Army by Tim Bowman. So he seen the UVF as not being a credible threat. It was more a show of strength, because really, as the Easter Rising showed, that if you took fixed positions in urban areas or even worse still in the countryside. And the British Army had time to deploy against you. They brought to bear everything they had, which is field guns, naval guns, So in the Easter Rising, once the British Army was deployed in great numbers to Dublin, it was almost a foregone conclusion that the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizen Army were going to get wiped out, which is what happened. But to illustrate this is the UVF in formation. So notice the bowler hats, which are indicative of the Orange Order, and also that came from the foremen and managers in the shipyard who wore bowler hats. And as you can see, there are mistakes. Okay, only one guy at the back here looks to have a bandolier on with what looks like a rifle, but it looks like it could be a musket. It's that old. So were they a credible threat? No, not really. But opposing them is the Irish Volunteers. Now, this is thanks to Mike King, this particular photograph at Down County Museum. So this is the Irish Volunteers at Portaferry. Now, this would have been them as they're being armed and ready to go to war. First World War, that is, because you can see that webbing and pattern is very much of First World War vintage. But you can see that both sides were well armed. How did they get those arms? Well, the Irish Volunteers, you'll find out in a moment, but here have Brown Square Barracks. So this is the barracks that I described earlier on, seeing the photograph, okay? And this just here was Adjie's Pawn. Adjie's Pawn, sorry, bad slip. Adjie's Pawn. So in here you have the Old Lodge Road going up. So this particular guy, Fred Crawford, became known as the main gun runner and became the famous gun runner. But this guy here very quietly was arming from around about 1910 onwards, but he was a dealer in weapons and he kept on dealing weapons. In fact, he was the person who actually got rid of the arms for the UVF somewhere in the 1920s. And if you're doing your tours, so this is Carrickhill. So earlier on I showed you the rioting happened here, okay? This is the Old Lodge Road. It no longer exists, but the pattern is still there. This is this road here. And this would have been, it's a secure unit for people who have mental illness. And this is where the pawn shop was. So what about Crawford? This is Wilson Street. So Fred Crawford's family had bought up properties in Brown Square. So this is the place where in 1857 the Hussars charged up with their sabres drawn. And what I want you to notice, so this is the Canon Irvine Lodge. It was the 12th. It was the one time that people got photographs. Remember, photographs saying were an unknown quantity. So everybody wanted to be in it. And I love this character, the beard on the left-hand side. This is called Bilton Place, just down here. This is luxury housing, by the way, compared to Bilton Place. But over on your right, there's two guys that are looking extremely concerned, I think, towards the camera. And I'm just going to enlarge that. So this guy here, I think, is called Knowles. And the reason he's looking really concerned is because just behind him is Crawford Starch and Bleach Works, where 12 Maxim machine guns, 500,000 rounds of ammunition, unknown numbers of rifles and pistols were being stored as this photograph was being taken. Because Frederick Crawford was the game changer when it came to home rule. So the UVF, instead of being not a threat to the British Army, all of a sudden acquired the weapons of mass destruction, which is what Maxim machine guns were. The British Army was to find out its cost on the battlefields of World War I. The machine gun changed how battles were won and fought for the bad, I might add. So to have 12 of them, Crawford worked out that would be the equivalent of about 10,000 men. So that's why he secretly started the arm. And this is the exact spot. So you can see the starch manufacturing. He also built a firing range and he trained men there from 1903 onwards. So today, this would be Belfast Metropolitan College, and this is their car park now. So, so I reckon the range was here, but here that photograph would have been taken looking that direction. Those two men were standing just here in the alleyway, and you can see then, as I say, that's where the arms were kept. We know that. But here comes the other strange fact. So today you'll have people who you'll see murals of Frederick Crawford, the famous gun runner, UVF. But his great grandfather Alexander, who died in 1823, was a chemist who invented a new formula for commercial chlorine. So that's how the Crawford family got their money. They built a new factory in Lisburn on the old site where the council offices are now, and his grandfather Alexander then used the money to buy 2 acres of the site, and he also bought up Campbell Street and Johnson Streets, where he made money from their rent. His father developed the Wilson Street factory, built a mission hall that became the Unionist Hall part-time, okay? And it supplied area to hold water during the 1865 drought, and he genuinely helped the poor around the area. He's a very religious man. And then Frederick Crawford himself was born 1861. He died in 1952. Terrible businessman. Under Frederick, he didn't seem to have much of an interest. And so he went on long jaunts around the world, and he left that guy Knowles to run the factory. But one of the strangest facts that I have discovered is that his great grandfather, Alexander Crawford, was a United Irishman, and he was imprisoned for high treason, along with, you guessed it, Henry Joy McCracken in the same cell. So the UVF gun runner's great-great-grandfather was actually one of the founders of the Republican movement in Ireland. So again, some of the jaw-dropping contradictions that you get at Brown Square. Fred didn't want to go into the family business, and his father got him a position as an indentured apprentice at Harn and Wolff, where he became a marine engineer. He worked on the Doric and the Ionic, which is the white class liners. And he was at the launch. He came back for the launch of the Olympic in October 1910. He received multiple injuries. Frederick Crawford was a doer. He wasn't a talker or a thinker. He was injured in the eyes, injured in the legs. But he wasn't happy in Harn and Wolff, and he joined the White Star Line in 1884 as an engineer. Didn't really suit him, but he came back to the family firm in 1886. And incredibly, in 1892, so long before anyone thinks that the Ulster Volunteer Force came about, he formed Young Ulster, which was the core of the UVF, armed and built the rifle range at Wilson Street, and he drilled and instructed men on weapons. He himself, Crawford, was a crack shot, and he was able to hit a target at 1,000 yards. That, speaking of someone who knows about it, that is no mean feat. In 1884, he joined the British Army, and he was transferred to Donegal Artillery, and he fought in the Boer War. And all through the 1890s, he used the Ulster Reform Club, which still exists on Royal Avenue, as a cover to buy weapons until they found out what he was doing, and he was kicked out, essentially speaking. So who was the guy? So I think they're great photographs of him. So that's Fred as a White Star officer. I'm sure Peter will be pleased at this one when he's doing tours of Titanic. Now he has another one. This is Fred as a major in the Donegal Artillery, and this is Fred in the Boer War. So you can see the character alone. He arranged to get these photographs taken, so he would have been very self-aware. And during the Boer War, he also bumped into this guy who's going to appear in next week, okay? Because that's a guy called Philip Woods. So he fought in the Boer War too. So this is a lot of these guys got their military grounding, especially their grounding on how to deal with guerrilla warfare. Okay, but I'm going to save that for next week. And so the arms had arrived, As you can see on the left-hand side, the Punch magazine then seen, because the British Army brought an embargo on weapons and searched everything, it meant that Irish volunteers weren't getting weapons. Crawford himself realised that, and he decided that he wouldn't do it piecemeal, that he would do it properly, for want of a better word. So here you have the famous cartoon with, this is Carson whispering in the ear of the customs officer to warn him off about, this is John Redmond, who was a leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party, to search him, meanwhile Carson's loaded with guns and weapons. But you did have weapons coming in the Ireland for the Irish volunteers, and soon to be Irish Citizen Army as well. And this is Molly Spring Rice. Oh, sorry, Molly Childers on the right. Molly Spring Rice and Erskine Childers' wife. And this is on the Ode, which is a shipment of weapons brought in. And notice they're from Hamburg, so they were German weapons. Things were really starting to take a turn for the worst, especially in work. So work was one of those places up until this point was really left out of sectarianism. But because of the issues in and around Home Rule, the sectarianism then erupted within places of work. So this is Queen's Island Unionists. These are all shipyard. You can see the shipyard men, the bowlers there, okay? So these would have been managers, shipyard men, foremen, draftsmen. And this is one of their lectures that were given and accepted in 1914. So parliaments had failed to placate the enmity of those sworn rebels, and never could hand of genuine friendship extended by a Protestant nation to placate the evil designs of Rome. Peace and prosperity could never reign in any priest-ridden land, and he stated as his absolute conviction as a South of Ireland man with a worldwide experience that the only cure for Southern Ireland was another Cromwell. Every other successful nation had driven the Romans out, and Ulster must keep them out. God had blessed their great industrial endeavours, and the Pope had cursed them, and blessed the boycotting and tyranny of the South, which God had cursed. As Providence had showered his blessings on the people of Ulster with a lavish hand, and since they were heirs to the grand and noble inheritance transmitted to them by their gallant forefathers, they were the custodians of the grand trust that were bound by every law and honour and chivalry to save their children from the most pauperizing and degrading bondage of Roman slavery. And this was delivered to men who actually believed every word and wanted to believe every word. I think that's the other thing. Well, how did that pan out then? Well, this particular gun would have been brought in by Fred Crawford. It would have been brought into his works at Brown Square, and then this particular weapon here was moved to Narrow Water, because this became the South Down Militia. And you can see the Maxim gun is mounted on a horse. If he fired that thing, you can imagine the horse disappearing up there at 200 miles an hour. But notice that these weapons, we know they're Crawford's because he insisted that every rifle that he bought would have a bayonet, because he reckoned that they would run out of ammunition. And so everybody had to do bayonet drill. And then they decided they were going to create something that had originated in Scotland, a covenant with God to protect Ireland from being or from Home Rule. It was signed on Ulster Day in September 1912. 237,368 men signed the covenant, and 234,046 women signed. They weren't allowed to sign the covenant because they were women. So they were only allowed to sign the Women's Declaration. But you can see the depth of feeling that by that stage of the game, almost all the Protestant population of Northern Ireland signed that covenant. And it was signed as far apart and as far afield as India and Canada, where people were swearing they were going to come home and to protect. And the symbolism here, you can see this is the famous photograph where Carson And you now have Craig, as you now know, it's his mastermind at the City Hall. And you have the women there. So this is the time of suffragettes, as you can see by the clothing. So it was very much a case of, well, we can do this too. So it all erupted. People did sign it. It's said that Fred Crawford signed it in his own blood. So if you have a look, you'll see Frederick Hugh Crawford, officer commanding, and he was officer commanding of the guards for Craig and Carson. And you can see where he lived, Chlorine Gardens, Belfast. So today, if you cut through from the Lisburn Road through and into where Queen's University is, going through Chlorine Gardens, that was they owned all that land. So he signed it, and so do some of the most important people in Belfast. You'll see just single names there, so I don't know who this guy is. From Dunmore, this guy's Laganeel House. Okay, so that's something I intend to have a wee look at later on to see who actually did sign it with him. I do know, because if I bring this up, because if you have a look at Ballyclare, this is the Ulster Covenant in Ballyclare, East Antrim, and down here you have Francis Higgins, my grandfather, signed it at Ballyclare, because that's my father's side of the family, and my mother's side of the family. So here you have Elizabeth Higgins, and she lived in 32 Wilson Street, which you now know the story of Wilson Street, and she signed it in Wilson Street Club Hall. Now, that's my granny there. And these are the women who would have signed the Ulster Covenant. That particular girl, this woman here, that's her down there, Mary Jane McCauley, is here. So they would have all signed the Ulster Covenant. And this photograph is taken on whenever they stayed at a place called Drum the Grey House, which is on the Antrim coast. Again, I'm going to come to that as part of the World War II history. So these are the old women. There's a guy called Mr. John. He looked after Drum the Grey House. Mr. Donnelly, who was also one of the heads of the Belfast City Mission. Now, I'm going to bring in this man at this point, because this woman here is called Lizzie Patterson. Her husband was this man. He was James Patterson of Townsend Street, and he had joined the UVF. He then was merged in with the 9th Battalion of the West Belfast Royal Irish Rifles, and he was then sent and trained at Ballykilner Camp. So that's that link that we have at Ballykilner Camp. And during the war, he won the military medal for rescue. He pulled 5 guys out of a burning tank and pulled them across under fire. And for that, he got the military medal, and also the DCM, the Distinguished Conduct Medal, for his operations. You're going to follow his career in the next couple of lectures up to the point when he died in the 1950s, because he also plays a big part in what comes next at Brown Square. So Fred delivers his trump card. So rather than bring guns in piecemeal, he very cleverly gambled. And what he did was he went to Hamburg on the 6th of February 1914, and he got the best rifles that a guy called Benny Spiro, who's a Jew from Hamburg, could give him. He got people like I knew from the Antrim Iron Ore Steamship Company, the crew of the ship. And he realized that he was going to have to do it by subterfuge. So even as they had the guns on board and they'd already set sail, they were betrayed by an informer. And the Times newspaper printed that there was a ship on its way with weapons for the UVF. And that the captain of the boat at that time, the boat was called the SS Fanny. He was called Captain Fallock. He wanted to put in to France, and Crawford incredibly pulled the gun out and put it to his head and said, "You have 2 choices. You can pull in and die, or you keep going." So Carson and Craig tried to cancel this. By the way, this is the unknown history. You know, people think it's just a foregone conclusion of what happened. Apparently, Crawford didn't get the message. I call it Nelson's blind eye, or as we used to say in the British Army, that my radio isn't working. And so they purchased another ship, the Clyde Valley in Glasgow, and they met at at Tusker Rock on the 19th, 20th of April, where they transferred the weapons. And we all know what happened. So that you can see the guns. So the next time you're doing a tour of Bangor, you can see the guns coming in. And it was really down to the UVF's organizational skills and the fact that they were in the new technology. Like the British Army didn't have motorized transport at this time, nor did the German Army. They did. They also had motorcycle corps. So you can see how the guns then, when they were landed, were quickly spread right across Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland. This is at Donaghadee. And this photograph here, you can see Fred Crawford is on the left here. That's a great tilt to his hat there. Like, that is really class. And this is Captain Phillip, who he had put the gun to his head. This guy here is Agnew, who captained the ship into the ports. This man here is Bruno Spiro, and he was the Jew from Hamburg who provided the guns. And this is Crawford's wife, the great get up. This particular guy here ended up committing suicide in a Nazi concentration camp just outside Hamburg in 1936, when he was supplying weapons to the Haganah, which is the Israeli secret organization for Israel. So Bruno has a long history. You can see how many they got. In one fell swoop, 18,173 Italian rifles, or sorry, Mausers, 6,000 Italian, 12,000 British, any number of million, upwards of 3 million. And so we know that 12 heavy machine guns, 5 million rounds of ammunition were stored at the Wilson Street Works, and unknown rifles. We'll never know how much was at Adjie's pawn shop. This is just the Larne landing. This is at Larne. So we're now into August 1914. Both sides were armed to the teeth. It looked like civil war. And the British Army was ordered north, was preparing to be ordered north whenever the army officers in Dublin refused to accept their orders. It was known as the Curragh Mutiny. And so any chance of the British Army deploying up and against the UVF ended at that point, in my opinion. Now, I do want to emphasise that the British Army was going to be deployed against the UVF, and the first Sea Lord, who was Winston Churchill, was prepared to flatten Belfast if required. So not everything appears what it seems to be. So whenever war was declared, both sides, then Home Rule was suspended. And Home Rule was only suspended initially for 1 year, because most people thought the war would be over by Christmas, you know, as they did, as you do. I keep hearing it. And we now know it went on 5, almost 6 years. And so the people who joined up, believing it was going to be over and they could then get Home Rule and finish this once and for all, were then disappointed, for want of a better word. It had its own consequences in 1816, the Easter Rising. But within days, the standing British Army was deployed. It was known as K1, Kitchener-1. And it consisted of, and this is the other misconception, up here you have Redmond presenting a colour to the Irish Volunteers, who would have became one of the Dublin regiments. Sorry, if you go down those regiments, the Royal Irish Regiment, the Dublin Battalion, or a regiment. Today it's the successor of all the regiments. You have the Rifles, the Connaught Rangers, who I have a soft spot for, the Munster Fusiliers, the Dublin Fusiliers, and these guys were literally straight onto a boat and gone within 6 weeks. As for the UVF, this is the unknown history. Lloyd George, Carson negotiated directly with Lord George that he wanted certain conditions before he would allow the 36th Ulster to join up. So the current phraseology is the 36th Ulster Division, the UVF became the 36th Ulster Division and went straight to war, and that was it. Not true. What happened was the negotiation was that they would stay together as a division and never be split. Whereas the 16th Irish Division, those Irishmen Catholics who joined up the Connaught Rangers and Munsters, they would be then sent to whatever operational needs the British Army required. So they were sent all over the world. And I'm going to demonstrate that in a moment. I'm not going to go into the First World War. What I am going to do is these are the men of Brown Square, and I'm just going to stop sharing for 1 second. Okay. I hope this works. If I go on here. So these are the men from Brown Square who were killed in the First World War. So it's the modern Brown Square, and I've deliberately done it this way. Here you can see Millfield Tech. You know, and if you're taking your tours down here, most of them will cross up here. You're going to pass Joseph McMahon's house. You know, so all these men, and this area here, I'll stop it here, because these men here have been completely forgotten out of history because they were Catholics, and they are not commemorated. There's mass, whenever we go to the Shankill graveyard, you're going to see some memorials there, none of which will say that it's all the men from the Shankill area who died in the First World War. It's not those men, and we're going to do that. Now, I'm hoping that this is going to work. So he lives. So this today, it's a car park. This is where he actually lived, and it should. So weird. Hang on. So I was hoping. Yes, there we go. So we are going to go in and visit these graves. So his brother was killed, and he's buried up at the city cemetery. But where Joseph Lochern of Townsend Street is buried is here. So this is Karamasika, Karasuli in Greece. So these men lie in foreign fields and are completely written out of history until now, because I'm going to put this up online so you'll be able to actually to do this. Let's have a look. And this should now take us, yes. So there's Gunnar Wilson of Wilton Street, his grave. How we like. And so on the western front, you have John Cunningham's grave. This is Cormorlees on the western front. So this would have been the Battle of the Somme. And there was men from Brown Street Brown Square who died at the Somme. Just trying to find the right one here. Yes. And so this guy has been completely written out of history. So Gunnar Russell of Coaches Street, and this, I'll just zoom out a wee bit because this is Gallipoli. So he arrived here, he was dead within weeks because he was in the 10th, he was in the standing army. So these men have been forgotten about. So the narrative of the First World War and Brown Square that you will hear is not the real heritage of the area, because it is a shared heritage. Unfortunately, these men shared the same fate, and you can see, you know, there's all over the world. These men are buried, you know, not just Battle of the Somme, all over. So I'm just going to stop that there and go back. I hope. Aha. Hang on. So these are the men. That's their stories. I will be taking you to some of their graves that were buried here in the north of Ireland, because some of them died of their wounds years afterwards. You know, and especially for members of the Catholic men who joined up. When they came home, they were badly wounded. So it's not like today where you have really good technology. Their wounds would have been seeping till the day they died. So they would have had to have their wounds dressed. And the only place where it could be dressed was the UVF hospital. So the irony was that you had Catholics in Falls Road who were ex-British soldiers who had to go in secret to the UVF hospital to have their wounds dressed. And it was only there they could talk about their experiences in the First World War, because 1916 had changed them from being heroes to villains. So we're going to be covering, you're going to see some of their graves. And that's why we're going to be covering Milltown. So, you know, this particular guy here, Patrick Joseph Moran, he was the Royal Garrison Artillery. So incredibly, his commanding officer was Fred Crawford, because he would have been garrisoned at North Queen Street. And that's where Crawford spent his war as the commander there. And you can see he lived at 10 Sackville Street, and his parents, he's buried up in Milltown. We're going to find this. I can't, because of lockdown, I haven't been able to go up there, but we are going to find this, and I will take you to his grave. These men here are other men that I've been told came from the Brown Square area, but I can't verify that. So they're in the book, but it's very much, I need to see evidence of that first. So how did we cope with the First World War? How did we do it? How did we actually think about these things? Well, I taught groups out on the Somme. So here, this is the Thiepval Memorial, top left here. This is a group of kids from Bangor, from Kilcooly Estate in Bangor, and from Polglass. And we bumped into a group of old soldiers called the Connaught Rangers Association. So, cut a long story short, they asked me would I become the head. Now, the Connaught Rangers was a battalion of the British Army that was raised in Connaught, but at the most successful night in recruiting history of the British Army was on the Falls Road, and that was when the Connaught Rangers recruited and got the men to join up. So there's a hidden history there, and we decided that we would do it properly. So I became the head of the North of Ireland Connaught Rangers Association. So in here, in this middle one, you'll see a man who was ex-RUC, then he was UDR. This guy here is UDR, Ulster Defence Regiment, which is like a militia. Here you have the Irish Defence Forces. So they could then, even though their grandfathers had been written out of history, we then came together to mark history. And we decided if we were going to do it, we were going to do it warts and all. So we were the first people to go to a place called Langemark, which is in Belgium. And we didn't make a fuss out of it. We didn't tell anybody we were doing it, but people got to hear what we were doing. And so 2 years later, when we came back, the German Army attaché, the head of the German Army in Europe, NATO Commando, Lieutenant Commander Colonel Volker Eden, turned up and remembered the Irish war dead as we did. So he went with us. So I was really chuffed getting a presentation from him. And the Orange Order then, as you can see, the Orange Order then realised, hang on a wee second, you know, there's another history here that we didn't know about. And so this is one of those amazing times that once we decided we were going to do this, it took on a life of its own. So this grave here in the top left is Willie Redmond. This is the brother of John Redmond, that guy who was in the cartoons. And his brother was killed. And he's buried here in a lonely grave on his own, just outside the British Military Graveyard, which I'm not going to go into now. But we marked his grave, as we always do. We went all over the world. This is an Irishman who was transported to Australia as a convict. And then he joined up to get home to Ireland. So he thought he'd get on a boat and get over to England and then abscond, because that's what his letters say. But unfortunately, on the way over, the boat was diverted to Gallipoli, and he lies here at 12 Pines Cemetery today. So we then turned up at the Thiepval Memorial, and we were asked then, would we want to become honorary members of the Irish Defence Force for one day, because they asked us would we march together for the first time since 1918. And so here you have myself as a standard, and I was never a good parade soldier, so this is actually one of the better photographs of me. And you have a sergeant major who you can always tell is a sergeant major no matter where he is. And you'll see us forming up the march. And we actually marked on the place where the Connaught Rangers battalion ceased to exist. They were annihilated, gone, finished, and totally annihilated. And so that's us marking the grave a few years back. So yes, Brown Square has a shared heritage, and it shares the same heritage with the First World War. And that's how we're going to handle the lectures from here on in. So what happened next? Well, that's for next week. I've run on by 10 minutes as per normal. So, but because this guy here, I mentioned him away a few slides ago, because he's Philip Woods. And Philip Woods became the MP for Brown Square. And he also campaigned in Brown Square on the Falls Road, on Hamilton Street, on John Street, in his full uniform. And he was elected. And so his story is part of our story next week. But I'm going to leave the First World War with this guy here, Tom Kettle, because Tom, wrote, he was killed in action. He wrote that, I joined the British Army as a hero and I ended up just an bloody British officer. But he died in 1816. So he died not for flag nor king nor emperor, but for a dream, born in a herd man's shade and for the secret scripture of the poor. So in memory of all those who didn't make it through. So that's it for tonight. So as per normal, I'm going to give it a couple of minutes for any questions. If you just want to unmute yourselves.